Hello there, and welcome to the 251st edition of the After Weekly, our weekly show where we generally tend to discuss the latest gaming and technology news, and thanks to Sony's State of Play, there's a ton to get through. Just a bit of news on the Direct itself. We're actually going to be splitting it into two shows. We're going to be having the standard news show, and we're going to be splitting out a separate Q&A section into a show that will appear probably a day or two after the main Direct goes public. So look forward to that. We really want to sort of concentrate on making both elements of the show better, and splitting them out into separate shows seems like the logical way forward. Joining me for this one, though, first of all, Oliver Mackenzie. Hello.
Yes, Rich. Very exciting plans for the Direct, and a pretty decent slate from Sony as well.
Absolutely, yeah. Certainly a huge State of Play, right, John?
Yes, indeed. And beyond that, we also have some new discussion angles, I think, that go beyond news for the show at the end. So it's not just going to end after the news, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, certainly a lot of reaction to the High on Life video that we recently put out, High on Life 2, and man, we got to work through that. Yeah, but certainly a lot to get through on that front. So, well, let's just crack on. Okay, first news topic of the week, State of Play. So many games revealed within, 72-minute special there. Where do we begin? I think we should probably talk about the announcement that everybody is talking about, which is that the God of War trilogy is coming back. The original Greek epic is returning, presumably to PlayStation 5. Interesting announcement. John, no footage.
Yeah, I mean, so they didn't really announce much on this, just that it's happening, but they specifically say God of War trilogy remake, right? Suggesting this is not just a remaster. And this got me thinking,
Yep.
all right, this is very early. They're putting this out here with nothing to show yet. And TC Carson, the original voice actor of Kratos, comes out. Very stylish, by the way. I like this guy. He's got some attitude. Based on all of this, it got me wondering a little bit. What if this, and I could be totally off base, totally spitballing here, right? What if this is a Blue Point game? And it's built from the ashes of the canceled God of War game that I think we saw some assets to even. That was They were doing that games as a service God of War game, right?
Right,
so
okay.
They're already steeped in God of War. They're making tons of assets probably, right? So what if you leverage that work to create something like this? Like who else would be a better fit for sort of remaking those games than a company like Blue Point, right? Again, total spitballing, but like to me, that would be an amazing thing to see happen.
I guess the question is how much of that work would be transferable, right? Because you'd expect that it would be an entirely different project for
sure,
games as a service.
But it's more about the aesthetic, right? It's like the art assets and things like that, and maybe some of the workflow, and like I'm sure there's elements of it that seem potentially transferable, right?
Right. Okay.
That's what I'm thinking. And as far as this being a remake, that could mean many things. I mean, they could take the approach of just adapting the original game design to this. But there's also this idea that being presented as the trilogy, it's actually like a singular vision, right? Like where all three games, the full story is told as a singular entity. You're not just playing God of War 1, 2, and 3 back to back. It's more like a single game now that tells the full story in one with a consistent gameplay model behind it.
Right. That makes sense to me. What do you think, Oliver?
I think John's theory is interesting on this title, that it could be a Blue Point joint. I personally don't think so necessarily, as much as I'd like that to be true, because I think Blue Point are the masters that's going to work. Wishful thinking possibly, but I do think that Sony would have come out and announced, especially because Blue Point is an internal Sony studio that's held in very high regard. I think they would have announced that Blue Point is attached to this project. Instead, it's just Sony Santa Monica on that developer line. Now, I'm sure that in this case would include a lot of outsourcing of various kinds. It could even include like a major outsourcing of development to other studios beyond just art assets and things like that. But I don't think it would include Blue Point in a substantial capacity, or else they would have announced that.
And, just as an aside, Blue Point has worked with God of War before, right? Like they actually did the God of War collection back on the PS Triple. which is cool, you know.
Yeah. And they also worked as a support studio on God of War Ragnarok. So
interesting.
Again, they're really tied in with this IP. And of course, they had that live service title that John referenced that is unfortunately not going to see the light of day, or perhaps fortunately, depending on your perspective on Sony's live service push. I myself have a bit of a negative perception of that, but I do wonder what this means for upcoming games. I do think Sony Santa Monica is working full steam ahead on their next Norse trilogy God of War game. But, you know, I mean, this could well come after that port, come after that game, given the development timeline that's implied here by this game being in early development, according to this presentation. But yeah, this seems promising. I wonder how far they'll go in terms of remaking. I think the key question on a lot of people's minds is, will they go third person behind the shoulder? I hope not. I hope they maintain that original camera perspective from the games, because those games are really designed quite heavily around that kind of isometric perspective. And I think it worked really well for those games. And I wouldn't necessarily want to see a whole lot of changes relative to those games. I wonder, you know, you could kind of integrate them more in terms of power-ups, in terms of things like this, but then you lose the whole conceit of, at the start of the game, you lose your powers. So I think you kind of need to stick with the original kind of gameplay structures that were present there. But yeah, this is really promising. My only critique is that, you know, I would have loved to have seen Ascension here. I would have loved to have seen Ghost of Sparta, Chains of Olympus. Maybe those projects are not suitable for this kind of project. Maybe that's outside the scope. But you also think, hey, maybe a remaster collection could have also been a good project, right? Liberate those games from older platforms, get them on the PlayStation 5. That could have been a good shout there. But certainly the prospect of a full remake of like the mainline first 3 games in the series, that is like super exciting on a lot of levels. I just hope we can see it, you know, sometime this decade, because these projects take a while.
Yeah, there's a couple of things from my perspective. First of all, the kind of erasure of God of War Ascension, I'm kind of a bit bothered by that, because, I mean, I know it wasn't a huge success for Sony, but, you know, it was a great game from my perspective. I thought it was fantastic for the PlayStation 3. Secondly, why announce it now? That's the other thing. If it's so far ahead, you can't show anything. Why announce it now? Did they need to, they don't actually need to announce it just to make a state of play good. Mm-hmm. You know, I can't imagine it's that far away if they're announcing it now. You know, it just seems counterproductive, because, you know, basically people are just going to keep asking when it's coming now for years to come. If it's, you know, if we are looking at like, you know, several years.
It's the Fable mistake, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So a very, very curious reveal. Sons of Sparta. That was very, very interesting. Kind of curious as to why they wanted to show the PS5 Pro version of that. John, what do you make of this?
Yeah, that is that is very weird, I must admit. But I'm actually very curious about this one, because they worked with Mega Cat Studios, which has done a lot of more like sort of old school stuff, and this is. I was surprised and delighted to see that it's actually like a pixel art game. Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I thought for sure, I heard about this a while ago, but I thought for sure they were going to give her a different style. But I like what we're seeing here. This looks promising, and it's out now, apparently, or at least it should be. So I do want to check this out. It does, you know, playing as a young Spartan, it definitely has a different look and feel to it than any prior God of War game, I would say. But
yeah.
I don't know. It looks interesting. The thing about these sort of like search action games is that doing them right is not easy. You can make one that looks amazing, but there's so much challenge in terms of building a game world that remains interesting yet challenging to explore, a combat loop that is engaging throughout the entire adventure. All these things need to hit right. And, you know, until I actually play it, I can't really say one way or the other. We'll have to see. But I do like the look, at least, so I'm definitely eager to give it a shot.
Absolutely. Any thoughts on that, Oliver?
Not too many. I defer to John's thoughts on games like this, of course. But I gotta say, I love Shadow Drops. It's like a nice little treat.
Yeah, I agree.
These great games. Remember, I think Sony did this in their 2014 presentation, their kind of E3 era presentation. I think they released the game Entwined, I think. That's the first that I can remember of people doing Shadow Drops during these kinds of presentations. and I've always just been a huge fan because it's like a little unexpected gift from the publisher to you without any anticipation.
Mm-hmm. Excellent stuff. Okay, let's move on. Let's talk about Saros, the new game from Housemarque. We've had a sort of drip feed of gameplay from that. It's always looked fantastic. Same thing here, right, John?
Yeah, absolutely. So they've put out an extended gameplay overview for this game. And of course, Returnal, I would still maintain, is arguably the best Sony first-party title of the generation. There's a few others I might put up there, but it's that good. Returnal was an absolute masterpiece and the best thing that Housemarque ever made, I would say. And just having a continuation of it, but something that also still feels unique, I think is a perfect move. I'm really, really interested to see how this turns out. And I love the new visual designs here. Returnal is a very good looking game. And I feel like this is it's not a monumental shift in terms of visual design or anything, but it definitely looks like an upgrade. I appreciate, so one of the things about an action game like this is that you need to get like the character right, like the camera placement, the animation, the movement of the character. And they did one of my favorite things here where they gave him this sort of like almost like a trench coat design which means you get a lot of flowing fabrics. I love flowing fabrics in games. Like I remember seeing Assassin's Creed Unity for the first time, and that actually was what drew me to it, is the upgrade in the fabrics. And they've totally got that going on here. And I think that that alone should make the action just feel great, I think, which is exciting. It's also still a particle nightmare in the best way.
Right.
Which is something that they were known for. They, presumably this is still Unreal Engine, as was Returnal, but they sort of like architected their own robust particle systems in the past. And I would suggest that's what we're seeing here, because there's a lot of unique particles being shown that are very specific to what Housemarque does, which I like. Suggesting again that it's their own. There's also there's that one point where like almost like an ashen creature rises up with like this lava boiling beneath the surface, and the way that sort of fills in, it looks really, really visually interesting. So I think we're going to see some additional visual effects that is unusual for Unreal Engine, which I'm a big fan of course. So, but obviously, the gameplay, that's what I'm here for with this, and I can't wait to see how it actually plays out. And I think this is going to be a top tier PS5 game, probably one of the best that will have been released for the whole generation, if they can match or even exceed Returnal.
Would you concur with that, Oliver?
Well, Returnal, I bounced off Returnal slightly, not for a lack of quality. It's a rather hostile and unforgiving world and a rather hostile and unforgiving game. For both good reasons and bad. I can appreciate what Returnal is doing, but I personally, that's not my kind of game.
How far did you get, by the way?
With my limited time on this earth, I think I got to the 3rd biome.
Okay,
game, so
that's not bad.
Not bad, not too far.
I understand though, Oliver. I get it, and I can see why this is not for everyone, because it is extremely punishing until you get that route down. But
yeah, but this game actually seems like it might be a little bit different, because they have a whole upgrade cycle going on. They have like a balancing system going on. They have a central hub area where you can talk to crew and spend resources. They're trying to build this game as much more of a kind of come back stronger mantra. Right. And they're trying to make it so that it's still got that roguelite structure, but it's not quite as punishing on the back end. So I think that's quite promising. Technically, they have confirmed Unreal Engine 5, but I think we took a look at this in an earlier showing, and it was kind of like inconclusive as the graphical features they might be using. I still think that's the case here. This looks fairly familiar, I would say, in terms of, seeming a lot like Returnal technically, but of course, this is just a series of brief gameplay snippets, so it's hard to be too conclusive about the state of this game at the moment. But yeah, I'm excited for this. And I'm excited to maybe get that kind of bullet hell roguelite Returnal experience, but in maybe a bit of a friendlier package. It's more amenable to shorter play times with a bit more progression.
Interesting. I find it quite interesting, John, that there was a time in the annals of gaming where, shooting games were a staple. And
that's right.
Kind of like it's now an exception rather than the rule. It's, and at least it's Housemarque doing this and delivering the quality, right?
Yeah, for sure.
But, I can't help but sort of think that there's probably a lack of diversity in gaming now. And and it's kind of weird how it's a shooting game that's sort of standing out so spectacularly within this state of play.
Oh, indeed. And but I feel like this is such like the right direction for Housemarque, right? Given their arcade roots, to adapt that into this sort of game as they did with Returnal and again with Saros. I'm just happy that they've managed to find this success, right? I've talked about this before, but you remember the Gamescom before Returnal had even been revealed, where they spoke to us, and basically it was after they revealed, I think it was that canceled live service game that they were doing, right? And they were basically like, well, we actually have this other project in the works, and like, if this doesn't hit, the studio might not survive, kind of thing. Like, it was very doom and gloom. And I really felt bad for them because they had done so much amazing work, and like I wanted to see them persist. And then that game ended up being Returnal, and well, the rest is history, and here we are.
Fantastic. I would like to see Resogun too, though, mind you.
Something smaller, that was cool.
Something smaller, something simpler.
Super Stardust HD2 or Super Stardust 4K. I don't know.
8K, you would.
8K, yes, 8K.
8K on the Pro, why not? Okay, great stuff. Sticking with Sony, let's talk about the announcement for Death Stranding 2 on PC. Now, obviously, we kind of knew it was coming because it had been rated in one of the ratings boards, and we were expecting it actually sooner, but it's coming out in March now. That's fantastic. Looking forward to that. I think the only sort of slight curveball has been the announcement that Nixxes has been involved in the port, because you go back to Death Stranding 1, that definitely seemed to be pretty much a baby of Kojima Productions, the PC version, and indeed every other version that followed. Interesting development, right, John?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that this is probably what has allowed them to get this port finished in such a quick time and get it ready for the market. It makes sense to leverage Nixxes' experience to get the game out. So I'd imagine that's where that comes from. But what I'll be curious about is if we end up seeing other more unusual ports of this game as we did last time, like iPhone ports and such.
Oh man,
and Xbox.
I'm waiting for that iPad video from Oliver on Death Stranding 2. So I hope we get that. But I mean, what can I say? I love Death Stranding 2. Very, very cool game, and I'm very excited to see what they can do on the PC. I think we have an idea of what they can do, but it'll take advantage of all the extra features of the platform. And Decima has so far as it's Death Stranding 1 worked very well on the PC. I just hope that they fixed the camera bug. You remember they had that camera stutter issue, or like that there was that like persistent sort of like hitching, and they fixed that. But I don't think it was fixed on Death Stranding 1 on the PC. So I hope it's not like reintroduced in the PC version of Death Stranding 2.
Well, I'm curious about the nature of the port now, because I mean, it kind of makes sense to get Nixxes involved, right? Because current generation Decima, they've handled the PC ports on that, so it's a natural fit. But at the same time, I am aware that Kojima Productions' own port of Death Stranding 1 was kind of better than the Sony ports of like Horizon Zero Dawn, etc.
It was.
So, I'm hoping that we're not seeing sort of some of the typical things that have started to creep into Nixxes PC ports, like issues for 8GB graphics cards, streaming, that sort of stuff. And there's also been a kind of like, how can I describe it? You kind of need hardware that's a bit more powerful than it should be to replicate the PlayStation 5 experience. I think that's what we've seen on some recent Nixxes ports. So I'm wondering the extent to which Kojima Productions is working with Nixxes as partners, or whether it's Nixxes taking point on the port, that kind of thing. Another thing which I think I saw this, and I was a bit disturbed. Cutscenes capped at 60 frames per second. I think they mentioned that in the trailer.
Well, they specifically said unlocked frame rates in gameplay, suggesting that yes, the cutscenes are probably locked at 60. That's always a bummer. I'm sure. I
think it is a bummer. I'm just going back to Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, where I played it on PC, and the entire first bit, which is the Raiders of the Lost Ark recreation, kind of just didn't work for me because I'm kind of swapping between DLSS multi-frame gen at over 200 frames per second to suddenly being busted down to 60, and it was not.
While
great.
That's true, I don't think it's going to be as problematic here because there is a larger sort of like split between cutscenes and gameplay in Death Stranding 2. Whereas Indiana Jones was constantly moving in and out of like that first person to third person cutscenes, like it's such a pace that I felt very, very jarring, and I don't think that's going to be a problem here. But still, you're right. And maybe that's part of the reason, because if they're going to support technologies like FrameGen, as we know, when you have those like cuts that you see in a quote unquote cutscene, it doesn't always play nice because you're relying on information from prior frames. And if that information doesn't exist, it's the same problem with TAA, but it tends to be kind of weird with FrameGen, I've found. It's hard to get that right.
Anything to add, Oliver?
Not too much. Just to say that in this trailer, there's some interesting stuff with like some seemingly 30 FPS stuff, some unlocked stuff, some 60 FPS stuff. I do kind of wonder about the hygiene of the footage that ends up in some of these trailers, because I'm sure this will be, at least a stable 60 FPS on at least some PCs.
I like that turn of phrase, Oliver, by the way. The hygiene of the footage. I'm going to use that.
Well, I've noticed it in other presentations for the State of Play here, and at least in those cases, you have the excuse that it's operating on a PlayStation 5, early states of development, things like that. But this is coming up in about a month. Could be operating on a high-end PC. Again, you'd presume they'd have that higher quality footage available. I just think it's like not the best way to show off a game like this necessarily if you're showing slightly shaky footage, but that's just a fairly minor critique. That does happen from time to time.
John, I'm loving this hygiene stuff because we've had a lot of discussions with various developers and publishers about the quality of the stuff that ends up in trailers, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is a discussion we've had many, many times, and we've actually had developers reach out and be like, hey, why do your YouTube videos look so good? Like, what can we do to improve ours? And it really is just like, it's very important to get this stuff right across the chain, be consistent with what you're capturing from how you're capturing, how the formats you're using, the intermediate formats and everything. If you don't get all that stuff right, and depending on how many times you export and mutilate this footage, it can wind up looking pretty awful. And
interesting.
Especially when you're dealing with PC footage, I think, because a lot of times PC capture, especially using built-in tools, the results are very much like not good in terms of like frame pacing. It's good in a pinch, but you don't actually get the proper experience represented.
Yeah, but it's all about hygienic footage. That's the takeaway. Okay, let's move on. Let's talk about Konami showing at the State of Play some fantastic games there, and a surprise that the Metal Gear collection is getting, the Metal Gear Master collection, should I say, is getting a second volume containing Metal Gear Solid 4 and Peace Walker. It's Peace Walker, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. And Ghost Babel.
And Ghost Babel.
This is awesome.
What? Let's talk about the showcase reveal, Metal Gear Solid 4. John.
Yeah.
Finally.
Yes.
It's happening.
Audie Surley's favorite game.
And mine.
And yours. I have mixed feelings on Metal Gear Solid 4 for sure. It's a very strange beast. But I'm happy this is happening because until now, the game has been effectively locked to PlayStation 3. And as we are well aware, the PlayStation 3 version does have some technical issues, one could say. It always ran with a double buffer, uncapped frame rate, right? So you were either 20, 30, or 60 FPS. Very rarely 60, only when you looked up. But as a result, it just kind of had this like inconsistent performance. And they also used that weird 4:3 resolution where it was 1024 by 768, I believe. But
anamorphic pixels.
Anamorphic pixels, baby. Just like those old plasmas, the 42-inch ones. And as a result, image quality wasn't great either. But yeah, it's been locked to PS3. Emulation was the way out for that. But even with custom builds, as you know, like RPCS3, it's a very challenging game to emulate. It was one of the most difficult games to emulate on the whole PlayStation 3, I would say. And it demands a very powerful PC. So the fact that they finally figured out a way to bring this back to modern platforms is good for posterity's sake. And we get to have this at full 60 frames per second, mostly. Because if you notice during there it was mostly 60 with a couple 30 scenes. And the reason I think that is, and this gets me wondering about the nature of this conversion, that most of the game's cutscenes were real time, but there were a few key sequences that were done in video, such as the sequence with Ocelot on the boat doing the handguns. That was a fully video-based sequence. So I'm wondering, based on this, every shot from that sequence is 30, which makes me believe that they're probably just sticking with video clips. Hopefully, the video clips are at least remastered in much higher quality. So we'll see. But I guess they're going to all this effort. They're not going to change the assets. I know, but part of me was hoping we would see some upgrades to make it look closer to that original trailer from 2005. That's ridiculous. They would never do that. But man, can you imagine? Because you recall that, Rich, that original MGS4 trailer looked noticeably better than what shipped.
Yeah, absolutely. That was in the days where we sort of had rumors of these like mega powerful PS3 prototype development kits with like 2 NVIDIA GPUs in SLI and stuff like that, which kind of explains the original assets running sort of lock 60, right? And in that original trailer. And and it's kind of weird because that asset no longer exists or never did exist as a 720p 60 video. You could either have a 60 frames per second SD version, or you could have a 720p 30 WMV video download. You remember WMV?
Oh, WMV, baby.
with an IGN watermark on it, if memory serves.
Now,
so yeah.
The other thing, Rich, though, and I don't know if you remember this, and there is video of this out there. Do you recall that Metal Gear Solid 4 was demonstrated on the PS Vita?
I don't recall that at all.
There is indeed a video of this. I've even just shared it. It's not super smooth, but when they first revealed PS Vita, they actually Kojima Productions brought a demo of MGS4 running on the hardware. It's like 20 FPS, but it's pretty interesting to see that they were actually trying that. And it made me wonder, would we get a port of this game to the Vita? Obviously not in the end, but there was some hope, especially considering that the 3DS would receive a port of Metal Gear Solid 3, right?
Right.
But alas, this and Lost Planet 2, which was also shown on the Vita, never came to fruition on there.
I've got an interesting Metal Gear Solid 4 anecdote to share with you. It was one of the first games that I actually ran through frame rate testing in like 2007, 2008.
Okay.
Yep. And in that period, all the tool did was basically go through a video feed and count the number of unique frames and divide by 60. So there was no graphing or anything. And I just had a series of of MGS4 clips. And the results popped up on screen, and it was like 21 frames per second average, 23 frames per second average. And I just sort of looked at that 21 frames per second, and I put, if I publish this, this is going to just make people go crazy. It's going to really upset a lot of people. But it is not a particularly well-running game.
No. And again, it has to do with that annoying use of double buffering. Right? Where if it can't hold 30, it drops all the way to 20.
Yeah, and I think the bottom line, if we can be brutally honest, is that the RSX wasn't
it was not good enough
for that particular console generation. But going back to this new reveal, Oliver, any thoughts?
Yeah, I actually did review this in a little bit of depth here, and I think some of those sequences that John is mentioning there, the video clips, I'm noticing a pattern of aliasing. I mean, I could probably even count it on Revolver Ocelot that suggests to me this is just that original video asset, or at least something that's very closely derived from that source video asset, original video asset. So I don't suspect that it's necessarily going to be upgraded in that respect. Although, obviously, the 3D, the real-time 3D, looks very good, looks very clean, very high res, not many raw edges. I think MGS4 has aged quite well visually. There's a major reliance on real-time lighting, which I think actually helps here because there's a lot of direct shadow maps and things like that to just bump up the resolution and have an improved lighting presentation. And it doesn't have an overly like specular rich look like a lot of early console generation games.
That's right.
In the 7th gen. The characters are portrayed quite well. In retrospect, they have a little bit of that kind of plasticky, edge-lit look. But actually, I think it's a good look for this game. I don't think it has aged all that poorly at all. I do wonder, though, what they're doing. I mean, I'd assume here, based on the pedigree of Metal Gear Solid 4, and based on the fact they're doing Switch 1 and Switch 2 ports, I assume this is something that's closer to a full native port than something that could possibly
have to be
running or emulation. It would really have to be at this point. But I also do wonder, I mean, I think that this game probably could. There's probably a version of this game that could translate okay to Switch 1, but how does that actually look in practice on a Switch 1? Definitely, I think 30 FPS is probably the marker that they're going to be aiming for here, but in terms of how, like, what resolutions are they going to hit? Can they hit a stable performance level? Like, that is really going to be the test here, because I think the other platforms they're discussing here can probably do a pretty reasonably good job with this title, I would have to assume, and certainly the showing does look quite good. But it's specifically that Switch 1 and to a lesser extent the Switch 2 version that I would have some concerns about potentially here.
Right, yeah. Very interesting it's going to be coming out on Switch 1. I mean, in theory, the Switch 1 should be able to do this game. But then again, if it's a PS3 port with all of the sort of GPU bottlenecks that game had back in the day, I think the Switch 2 might be a bit challenged there. So really interested to see how that's going to be working out. Also, there were talk of upgrades to the Metal Gear Solid Master Collection Volume 1. So there is like a Switch 2 upgrade now, right, John?
Yeah, so this is what I've heard. I haven't actually tested it personally, but from what I'm looking at footage and what everybody's saying online, and we'll have to check it out, they've updated it. So things like, MGS2, MGS3, they're now updated resolution, 1080p, I think, and correctly running at 60 frames per second. So finally, after all these years, seeing Metal Gear Solid 2 running natively on a portable system has happened at 60 FPS. I wanted this for a long time. I thought we were going to get it with the PS Vita version, and it only partially happened. Like indoor sections ran at 60, but outdoors did not. So, and then the Switch collection comes out, and I'm like, really, guys? Like, you're doing 30 FPS on MGS2 of all things? They did. But here it looks actually like they finally got 60. Just 20-something years later. 25 years later. Great.
So Peace Walker is also included in the package, and we've had a port of that before via Bluepoint.
Correct.
What do you make of what we saw here, John?
It looks like a port of that. And I actually found it interesting that they were like originally for PSP and PS3, implying that somehow the original was a PS3 game. It wasn't. I mean, it came out on PS3, but later, right, as this HD version. But yeah, I mean, seeing this again with fresh eyes running in 2026, it's interesting because, as you know, I mean, it was a PSP game, and the visuals, I mean, they did some up enhancement work on it, but like kind of holds up really well when you consider what the platform it shipped on originally was. And the PSP in general still, like, it was a miracle of a machine, I feel. So it's cool to see this.
Yeah, I mean, the original ran at locked 20.
For good reason,
Yeah, it was pushing the PSP very, very hard. I don't know, it is one of those games where it's, I'm not sure running it at 1080p resolution does it the best, the most justice, to be honest. When you think of what it looked like on the original PSP screen, all of that sort of dithering as well, that was part of the aesthetic. It kind of all sort of came together because it was designed for that system, but it's kind of a bit stark, I think. But at the same time, great.
But game. Rich, as you saw, they also are including, and they call it bonus content, but I'd say it's more than that. Ghost Babble. Do you know what that is?
I don't. Tell me more.
It's a Game Boy Color original Metal Gear game that was released way back in the day. and it's really, really good. It's way better than you would expect. And it makes sense when you think about it. I mean, Metal Gear has its roots in like the MSX days, right? So, and of course, a lot of people know the NES games, but this was an original story-driven game that very convincingly pulled off the Metal Gear experience on a Game Boy Color. And it's also very expensive if you want to buy the cartridge. So having this included with the collection, I think, is a very, very cool thing.
Great stuff. Let's move on. Let's talk about Castlevania Belmont's Curse. John, you added this one to the sheet as a highlight.
Yes, Rich. We have a brand new Castlevania game, and it does seem to be following the more of the Symphony of the Night style game design with the search action open castle layout. And this comes to us from Evil Empire and another studio. These are the guys that made Dead Cells and also did the Rogue Prince of Persia, both of which are very, very excellent games. Obviously, they already forged this relationship with Konami in the past because Dead Cells itself received a specific Castlevania DLC, if you recall, which applied the Dead Cells formula to Castlevania. And this actually seems to be a fully original game. I don't know if there's rogue-like elements here or not. It does not necessarily appear that that's the case, but it seems that they've been given a chance to make a proper 2D sort of search action Castlevania game again, and I think that's really, really cool to see. It's smooth, it animates well. It's seems to be more of a 3D engine as opposed to it's probably the tech that they used for the Rogue Prince of Persia, if I had to guess, because it does bear some similarities to that. But I'm happy to see the studio, continue to rise up and do their thing, and they're pretty darn good at it. And given that that's the partner Konami's chosen to work with, I do at least have some faith that the game will be good. So my only concern is that the music side of things may not hit where I want it. We'll see. The trailer music was totally fine, but it was more orchestral, sort of like atmospheric stuff as opposed to what I would want from a proper 2D Castlevania game. But again, it's just a trailer, so we'll wait and see.
Let's move on to Silent Hill Townfall. I think Konami has done a pretty exceptional job in basically bringing back this franchise, right, John? I mean, this will be the third new game. Is it the third new game they've brought out since?
I guess there's a Silent Hill 2
remake. That's how you count remake.
There's also, of course, last year's Silent Hill F, and then there was that first Silent Hill. What was it? There was that DLC one that was short.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I think I know what you're talking about.
And then there's this one now, and it looks like again they're working with a partner studio, but that seems to be working for them in a way that really surprised me. Konami working with partner studios on Silent Hill is what many felt led to the series' demise, right? After Silent Hill The Room, everything that came after that was indeed developed by partner studios such as Climax. And they did an okay job on some of those games, I would say, but it never quite felt right. There was something missing with those efforts compared to the PS2 games, especially. And then the series essentially went dormant for a while after it completely, after that HD collection in the Downpour, which launched in a very, very poor technical state. It disappeared for a while, and they've really managed to find a voice for Silent Hill once again. And this one more than so this seems to be following Silent Hill F in the sense that they've taken it to a very different location. They're not attempting to simply represent Silent Hill itself. It's more like Silent Hill as an idea. And as a result, it's like this dark horror sort of town that looked, I mean, I don't know what you think, Rich, but to me, this looked more like a coastal town in England or something than like a U.S. town to me.
Yeah, the road signs are English.
So there we go.
Yeah, there's a 20-mile-an-hour limit there, which is very British town.
Perfect. I think it's meant to be Scotland, actually.
Oh, it's Scotland. Yeah, excellent. Scotland, okay, that's cool. But I guess the big change in this one is that, based on the trailer anyway, it seems to be first person.
Oh, interesting.
So they show a bunch of shooting with first person, and instead of using the old school hand radio, they now have like what looks like a Watchman.
Yeah.
Which I think is a fun touch. So I'm very curious to see how that plays out as well. And of course it's Unreal Engine.
Yeah.
But and Annapurna's involved, which is interesting.
Yeah, I think this looks great. I mean, quality of characters, quality of animation, quality of material. Specifically, it's got all the volumetrics you want in a Silent Hill game, right? I think this looks really, really cool.
Rich,
really
it's kind of surprising that we had to wait this long to get Silent Hill set in the UK, right? Because when you think of fog and coastal towns, like where else are you thinking?
Yeah, and dreariness. Basically, I've got to say, we're experiencing at the moment a weather system that basically means I don't think we've seen sunlight, proper unfiltered sunlight for upwards of a week now. So I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, yeah, just a bit more fog, and it's pretty much the UK as it stands right now. And of course, you've got deeply unsettling creatures with strange heads, which is a Silent Hill trademark. I think this looks great, Oliver. What do you think?
Yeah, I think this looks terrific. I think they have a really good thing going on, Konami, with partner studios, Silent Hill as a property, and Unreal Engine 5, because they seem to be hitting it out of the park with these games. Silent Hill F last year in particular was very, very beautiful, had incredible art design, just looked terrific from top to bottom. I thought it was really stylistically and technically a pleasing game in most respects, at least. And this looks like even dialed up from that in terms of just super granular detail. I saw in the little developer commentary thing, they're talking about using Nanite. They're talking about piling on as much detail as possible here with Unreal Engine 5. So I think that's really exciting. My only issue here is that, there are some brief snippets of what seem to be first-person gameplay. But for the most part, this is a cinematic piece that does not necessarily tell you a ton about the way this game is going to play in typical play, right? This is much more of an initial tease, an initial very exciting tease, but also something that needs to be followed up with more substantial gameplay showing for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just really, really happy that the series is in a much better place now, because you're right, John, there were those extremely disappointing ports. There was the sense that Konami had lost control of the series and had no real idea of how to take it to the next level. And the partnerships that they forged with these new games, Bloober Team, etc., has just really worked out very, very well.
Big time.
Cool. I guess there's still, a lot we don't know about this game. And there are, of course, the usual Unreal Engine 5 caveats that we have to attach. But, coming 2026, I'm looking forward to it. Okay, right. I'm going to allow you guys to let loose now, because you both have a game of the state of play which stood out to you as, I'm going to quote from the docket here, quote unquote, super awesome looking. And I think it's a game that's probably going to surprise a lot of the audience. So, Oliver, take it away.
Yeah, this is Star Wars Galactic Racer, and this is my game of the show for sure. This is my top game of the show. My first thought was this looks like MotorStorm with speeder bikes, because it has a lot of those elements. It is multi-class. It has off-road racing. It has big destruction elements. It also has like these big jumps, like if you remember in like the Pacific MotorStorm game when you're doing those gigantic jumps over the environment there. Very reminiscent of that. There's a lot of crashing out of vehicles here that feels very MotorStorm-esque. It's not quite as twitchy as MotorStorm, though, because there's a moment where the player's speeder bike collides with a structure and is relatively unharmed, so perhaps it's not quite as twitchy as MotorStorm is, because obviously MotorStorm, especially the first MotorStorm game, was very notorious for sending you careening after hitting just a tiny bump and your vehicle would explode into a million pieces. It looked very appealing at the time, but perhaps that was not the most satisfying experience for a lot of players. Technically, this is Unreal Engine 5, and this is PS5 footage. It's 60 FPS with some frame rate drops, but that's pretty good showing for a game that's presumably many months out from completion here. Kind of hard to know what they're doing technically. I noted some screen space reflections in the trailer, but I think tracking down any specific features, it's hard enough in trailers normally, and it's especially hard in a racing game when everything is flying by at 150 kilometers an hour. It does look like it has decent image quality though, and it has a 60 FPS target, it has good looking lighting, and it has quite dense environments that I think will look good when you're just tracking the horizon line or something, I think they'll look really terrific here. It's the kind of thing that I think would hold up really well at speed, and does hold up well at speed in this showing. And then in the cinematics, they seem to have, higher quality settings for the cinematics with super precise shadow detail, nice character work. I think it's quite a pleasing game. And there you really do see the Unreal Engine 5 heritage a bit more strongly. Lastly, this is an exciting game because it's being developed by Fuse, which is a new developer. I think they were founded in 2023 with a lot of ex-Criterion Games staff. So that's very promising. Criterion, obviously, they've been doing different things in recent years, perhaps, working primarily as a support studio for other Star Wars games, like the Starfighter games and whatnot. But they obviously have a very strong heritage in the racing genre, and some of the studio leads are from Criterion. That can only suggest good things. But I think this feels, to me, a little bit less like Burnout, again, a little bit more like MotorStorm, a little bit more like an off-road, off-track kind of racing title here than like a super drifty, super city racing game. That's not really what this is. But it looks really appealing for what it is. I think that's really cool.
Okay, John?
Actually, yeah, I mean, I do agree, Oliver, that this does look like very much MotorStorm. I hope they can match the track width of MotorStorm and the multi-layers, because that was actually one of the key features with that series. But I do think there is still a lot of Burnout DNA in here, because you can see straight away takedowns are in here. And the camera work and the way it slows down time, it is almost a perfect match for the way takedowns worked in Burnout games. And that is excellent. So I'm really happy to see that specifically being implemented here. And yeah, I think this looks amazing. The speed of it, the visual design, the art direction, everything about it, just like it looks super fun and exciting. And I'm cautiously optimistic that there's like a proper story mode in here, because this could be a way to sort of make an arcade style racing game work for a larger audience in the modern era. Because I've always thought about this, right? Like, I love arcade style racing games. I think, man, I need some new Ridge Racer. I need all this kind of stuff. But when you go back to them, they are really just like, here's a menu with a bunch of races, and you're just completing races one by one, and then, going through it. For me, that's fine. I don't need more than that. But I do know, and I respect that the modern audience is perhaps not as in tune with that, and they do want a bit more. And so by actually creating a story around the game in the Star Wars universe, perhaps it can have an effect similar to what NetherRealm pulled off with Mortal Kombat 9 and beyond, when they implemented like a proper cinematic story directly into their fighting games, and it worked, right?
This game does have a full discrete campaign,
Exactly.
plus multiplayer offerings. But they also mentioned something that I thought was curious, which is that your runs will be customizable. And I'm not sure if that implies some kind of roguelite element to this game,
Interesting,
or what they'll do. But at least they did specifically call out a full campaign, single-player campaign, in addition to some multiplayer competitive offerings.
I mean, this all sounds great. And I really think, and I can't say enough good things about the visual design, right? We've seen a lot of Unreal Engine 5 games, but I feel like there's something about the lighting here. So very specifically, they go for the golden hour with sunset, and it just looks brilliant, I think. And the materials on the individual crafts that they're showing in this trailer, perfect. Just awesome stuff.
A couple of things that stand out to me over and above everything you've said is, first of all, the sense of the action. It honestly feels like these things are just, going so fast they're going to come apart at any given moment. It's this sort of frenetic, kinetic energy to the action, where it feels like you're always on the edge, on the limit, as it were. I think that's absolutely fantastic. Secondly, I think, I don't know how they've done it, bearing in mind that these vehicles are hovering, but it does seem as though there is some kind of feedback from the ground that goes into the perspective and hopefully the feel of the game as well. So it honestly feels as though you're sort of a part of that environment, even though you're actually hovering above it. I think that looks fantastic. I'm really looking forward to seeing more and finding out more about the game and the developer behind it. Because this does look very, very special. And what can I say? Quietly excited about this one, I think. Shall we move on? Let's talk about the game that started the State of Play Kenna, Scars of Kosmora. This looks like a natural progression of what we saw from, I think, was it Bridge of Spirits, the first one?
Was.
And obviously Unreal Engine 5 again. But these guys did a really good job of using Unreal Engine 4. And it looks like, business as usual with UE5. Oliver, what do you think?
Yeah, this just looks kind of ridiculous, especially when you look at some of the cutscenes here, the level of quality that they've achieved. I think a lot of the studio comes from, and I believe the central executives behind the studio come from a 3D animation background, which I think really shows in some of these sequences, which just look, above and beyond almost anything else I've seen in games, I've got to admit. And yeah, this just looks absolutely stunning. I think it looks very pleasing. Kind of reminds me of some of the early UE5 demos in particular, if you recall those with the rocky outcroppings and whatnot. But yeah, I think this is really exciting. I thought the first game looked terrific. I think this looks terrific. Obviously, the upgrade in engine technology lets them do something interesting here, potentially. I think this is bound to be a very good experience, at least visually. The gameplay is somewhat less arresting than those cutscenes, but it's still quite a stunning game, I'd have to say.
Yeah, absolutely. The pedigree of these guys as artists, I think they were working in the motion picture business beforehand. It just sort of comes through here. What do you think there, John?
Man, I get nostalgic thinking back 25 years when you hear all this talk about we're going to have Toy Story graphics. And now here we are all these years later, and we're so far beyond that. Like, this genuinely looks like it could be a film. Like, the quality of the rendering is so high. And that's really cool to see. And of course, Bridge of Spirits was one of the earlier PlayStation 5 games that sort of impressed. This looks like a logical evolution where the scope and scale of everything seems to be increased, but there's also quite a bit of variety in the scenery here as well. And I'm very curious to see where they take this, because getting that first game done and out the door in a fairly polished state, that's their first game IP, right? Their new game.
Yeah.
And now that they've established that and developed their sort of like best practices for creating a game, I presume that this has allowed them to sort of expand and push the envelope in terms of what they want to achieve as like a larger scope adventure. Definitely very, very interested to see where that goes.
Yeah, also interesting discussion about the partnership with Sony on this one. So I am wondering, after the success of the first game, whether Sony has basically doubled down on this studio, and if so, I think it's paid off based on what we're seeing.
Yeah, if they've done that.
I mean, the visuals are just absolutely gorgeous. I mean, fantastic stuff. Right, let's move on. Control Resonant. We've seen a reveal trailer. That looked fantastic. We've now had the chance to take a bit more of an extended look at gameplay. And man, John, holy crap, this is looking amazing.
Yeah, like this is, wow. So with each since Control, I feel, so we had Control, and that really pushed the visual boundaries forward with what Remedy could deliver. And then Alan Wake 2 comes along and does it again, but really takes things even further. And it feels like all the learnings they've taken from the last decade are being poured right back into this game and allowing them to do all of that weirdness, but at sort of a scope and scale that's beyond what they've done. You know what I mean? Like when they first, there's a point where they show like, okay, now you're in control, and they're showing the city. And it's just that sort of everything's sort of like all over the place, right? And it has just an incredible look to it but like the size of it is what really, really surprised me. It really is like Inception land, if you will. I mean, obviously that's a deep inspiration here. The original game was much more pure brutalist design. This one obviously takes things a bit in a different direction, but I'm very interested to see where they go with this. Remedy really hasn't let me down in a long time. I would say Alan Wake 2 was a slower, more cinematic horror game. Obviously, the original Control was much more of a search action game in 3D, or as the kids like to call it still, Metroidvania. And this seems a bit different in that regard, I would say. And actually, some of the shots in the city running around, unleashing the powers, actually reminded me a little bit of, and maybe I'm wrong here, Infamous Second Son. I don't know. Did you guys sort of feel that at some points?
Yeah, I guess so. I guess also there's kind of like elements of like the Doctor Strange mirror dimension where everything sort of just changes, flips.
It's just
and still seems to work. I think it looks really, really interesting. I think there's another thing here. The story of Remedy. If you think about Control, it was a game that was kind of built to a budget. I think it was wildly successful. But if you think about the actual way the game was built, it was relatively confined. Right?
Yeah.
There was a certain degree of that. And I was wondering whether they would do something similar on that. I mean, here's the thing, you always get these financial reports from Remedy that seem to paint the studio as though they're in a really difficult, tight financial situation. Yeah, and you read these reports and you get really concerned about the fate of the studio and, the bet on Firebreak maybe not panning out, that sort of thing. And you're wondering what Control 2 would look like. And then this comes along and it's hugely ambitious by the look of it. They have not been afraid to continue to take risks, continue to increase the budget seemingly, because this just looks expensive, right?
And beyond that, Rich, also, this is like them tackling a new genre, if you will. Like,
sure, yeah.
Remedy is always known for shooting, and this seems to be a melee combat focused game.
Yeah, and shooting would have been the safe bet, right?
Absolutely.
Because they're great at it. They're absolutely great at it. Going all the way back to Quantum Break, that was a fantastic shooting game as well. Kind of overlooked, in my opinion.
Yeah, but I like it.
And they could have just, Control 2 could have been Control 2, could have been kind of an evolution, more of the same. This is not more of the same. This is like a big swing. I think it's they deserve kudos for this. I'm also curious about the technical presentation because you think about Alan Wake 2 and probably one of the things which is a valid critique is that image quality wasn't great. This looks a lot better. I'm curious what you think, Oliver.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I would have loved a more conventional sequel to Control just because...
Because you don't like Souls-likes.
Well, this isn't quite a Souls-like, I would say, but melee action games are a little bit less my bag than a third-person shooter, than kind of an action-adventure thing. But yeah, I do think this looks pretty great. It looks pretty similar features-wise to Alan Wake 2, I would say, on consoles, which was our raster-only presentation on base PS5, which is what we're seeing here. At least I think that's what we're dealing with based on the preponderance of like screen space artifacts and reflections and things like that.
Yeah.
But this is set in New York, which has some of the best looking segments in Alan Wake 2, I'd venture. And it definitely shows in this presentation as well, even though it has much expanded scope. I do kind of wonder what they'll do with PS5 and moreover PS5 Pro in this title, because obviously they did push out ray traced reflections in the PlayStation 5 Pro version of Alan Wake 2, which I took a look at. I'd hope that they would do something a little bit more interesting with this title. It does feel like some of that PC path traced goodness was not quite translated for the console audience. I don't know how realistic that is necessarily, but it would be nice to see a little bit more. But I think just based on this showing, does look very interesting, does look very bold, does look very Remedy. Perhaps the only thing that's missing is like bizarre asides with janitors and coffees and things like this, and the Remedy expanded cinematic universe with constant like Max Payne references and things like that. That's not quite present here. I presume that will come in the finished game and perhaps less in these early showings.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem to be a performance mode that they're showing here, and it does seem to be dropping frames, but even so, it does look really, really, really good. Really excited about this. Any final thoughts there, John?
No, just exciting to see it. I'm happy that they're continuing to make cool games. Love the visual design here, and I'm eager to try what Remedy's come up with for melee combat, because I do love melee combat.
I guess the other thing, of course, is that Remedy are all in on PC, and I'm fully expecting that we're going to be seeing an evolution of that engine looking great on PC, and it will have the path tracing loveliness. One hope.
I mean, we still use Control and like benchmarks, I feel, and like you still see that floating around a lot, right? So
yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's move on. Let's summarize a few games that caught your eye, John, principally because they're new IPs that look really, really cool.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, there was this Crimson Moon game, which I just wanted to highlight because it's like kind of ridiculously detailed in an interesting way. Like that initial shot inside the castle, it's arguably almost too much detail, but it looked pretty interesting. And at first my initial thought was the original Lords of the Fallen, if you recall. right? The one from Deck 13. It reminded me of that a bit, or a little bit of the what is it, Darksiders, I guess. Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Kind of see that influence as well, but it does seem to be an original thing. I like what they're doing with it. I think it's visually nice. It's detailed, looks smooth. Then there was Yakoh Shinobi Ops. Did you? So I don't know. First of all, have any of you guys played the old Tenchu games?
Oh man, no. I mean, we're talking decades, John.
They kind of reference that because Acquire, which, I mean, not to say there's a bunch of shared staff here anymore, but Acquire was originally behind that series, and Shinobi-Do as well, I believe. But this is a Tenchu-style stealth action game that does seem to have co-op as well. And I love those types of games. But what really caught my attention here specifically is that they seem to have this like almost isometric camera view at certain points.
Yeah, it looks great. It looks different. Right? That's what caught my eye.
And like the way they do that light vision cone with the shadows, it really looks like they've really thought about how to optimize the camera to allow for optimal stealth action. And everything is designed very much. In that sense, it's a little bit like Ninja Metal Gear, but like old Metal Gear, right? Where you have this very obvious vision cone and understanding of what's happening around the player, and you can sort of react to it, and it's all about sneaking. I mean, they even had like the equivalent of the cardboard box in here. Come on now. Yeah. So like this feels like a fun take on that sort of ninja stealth action game, and I really, really like what they're doing, and it actually felt unique, which is cool, right?
Yeah, as I said, it stood out because it was different. It was different from the norm. Looked fantastic, I thought. And there was another game that we wanted to talk about as well, Project Windless.
So this was a crafting thing, and I only wanted to mention it because I feel like this is going to be meme worthy at some point because you seem to play as a giant chicken man. At first, I thought when they showed the giant chicken man, I was like, wait, is this just like Fortnite? But then like, no, they're like deadly serious. It's deadly serious, but it's Chicken Man. I'm sure they're thinking like, Black Myth Wukong or something like that but like we got these animal characters based on legends or something. I mean, this is based on a novel, I guess they said. I'm not familiar with what this is based on at all, but I love seeing giant Chicken Man who's much larger than everyone else that he's fighting, just like plowing through fields of enemies. And I think the visuals look really, really slick. It's presumably Unreal Engine 5. It almost certainly has to be.
Right.
I don't know. I mean, it has that look at least, but I think that's cool. So that's just, another new IP game, but it is slash action. So Oliver's fallen asleep, I think, just looking at it. But come on, Oliver. Look, they got the shot where there's like thousands of dudes in the scene, and it actually looks convincing, and it's got a giant chicken man.
Yeah. I'm happy you're happy, John.
Oh, thank you, Oliver. You're the best.
Are you telling me you've never wanted to be a buff humanoid style chicken in a video game?
It's never really crossed my mind before. I might have to think on that for a while, Rich.
Buff chicken man.
Buff chicken man. Okay, let's continue with a roundup of everything that beyond what we've talked about caught our eye. John, Rayman 30th anniversary.
Oh man, Rich, this is very personally exciting to me. I love the original Rayman. I really, really do. It's one of my favorites. And it's also one of the first and most fascinating multi-platform games I can ever recall, because every version and often regional variants has differences in a way that's I never even understood, and I hope this collection addresses it, because this is a digital Eclipse joint with museum pieces and interviews and everything going on. But like, depending on the version you play, you have different backgrounds, different music, totally different sound effects lengths, different loading screens, different like map presentation. All these things vary per version, sometimes per region. And this seems to be an attempt to include multiple versions in here. You've got the PlayStation version, Jaguar, PC, interestingly, as well as Game Boy Color and Game Boy Advance. But curiously, no Sega Saturn version, which in my opinion is actually the best of the original versions.
Right.
So that's a little bit strange, but there's also some footage showing it in widescreen, so I presume that there's something there. I don't know yet, but I'm actually super, super eager to check that out just to see what they've done here and what kind of information is revealed, because there's even like a built-out version of that prototype that had leaked that seems to be here, but like more polished up a little bit to see what the game was originally supposed to be on the Super NES. But yeah, that's for multi-platform, like man, I can't get it, like the Jaguar version, for instance, which is I think the original. That one, like the second level, like second world, Bandland in that game, everybody knows it has the slidey mechanic where you're sliding in the musical bars. That whole like momentum system. The Jaguar version doesn't have that at all. It's this similar levels, but like the mechanics are 100% different. There's so much stuff like that between every version that just makes it really exciting to me and fascinating. And I never understood why they felt the need to make such drastic changes to every single version of the game, but they did.
We've got a supporter question here, actually, from 1040 STF, John. I'm super thrilled Rayman is back, and I'm sure John is too. Well, he is, as you've just discovered.
Yes.
But can I be allowed to be concerned about the digital Eclipse handling that game? They're notorious for emulation with heavy input lag, like with the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles collection, the Street Fighter collection, or the Mortal Kombat collection with a K. And I don't think a game as hard as Rayman needs more input lag.
Ouch. It's a valid concern. I agree. I mean, Rayman... I mean, seriously, Rayman 1 on everything, or the PlayStation, Saturn, and PC version specifically, is one of the hardest platforming games ever made, I would say. It's so brutally difficult. And they actually do have some enhancements to allow you to sort of tune the difficulty this time. But yeah, if the input lag problems persist here, that's not going to be good. But we'll find out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just a few more things they announced. They're bringing DOA 6 back, but they also announced a next generation Dead or Alive, and they showed a very little teaser. That looks cool. They're remastering Legacy of Kain Defiance and including a bit of a canceled prototype in there as well, which is cool. And then also a 2D action Legacy of Kain game, Ascendance. There's Rev Noir from Konami, which is an original looking RPG, so I'm curious to see where that goes. We got John Wick from Saber Interactive, which not much shown here, but potentially very cool. And then, First Light 007, which I think we're just waiting to play the game at this point. But overall, I feel like the show was pretty good. I mean, a lot of the stuff was like known quantity, but I'm happy with what they showed, and there's going to be a lot of great games in there.
Yeah, I think they did a fantastic job of basically saying to the PlayStation audience, there's a ton of great games coming this year, something for everyone almost. I thought it was really, really, really cool. Oliver, what's your summary?
Yeah, something for everyone. Maybe not something for me. I don't know.
Galactic Racer.
Galactic Racer was a big highlight for me, but the rest of it, like, obviously I see the merit in Saros, in Castlevania, Belmont Gate, and Silent Hill, Townfall, and all these different games, Crimson Moon, whatever. Lots of exciting stuff in there, your Rooster Combat title, but they just weren't quite up my alley in the sense that, like, a cool new platformer, a cool new racing game, or a new Doom game, things like this are a little bit more up my alley. So it wasn't quite my showing in the same way that, like, I felt like, for instance, last week's Nintendo Direct was a really interesting showing, even though it had far less games in the ringer for that. But I think this was a strong presentation judged objectively. It just wasn't a strong presentation in terms of my own very baroque personal preferences.
Fair enough. I think there's also something to be said from the fact that it is ultimately like just trailers. Actually going hands-on with a lot of these games, I think, will be quite different for you. Just have to wait and see, really. Okay, let's move on. So this week, NVIDIA has started to move on to different territories to show its CES demos. They had a presentation in London showing all of the CES stuff that you've already seen, Oliver. I had the chance to see NVIDIA DLSS multi-frame generation for the first time. The demo I saw, I'm not sure it's the same one you saw, but it was basically from the Outer Worlds 2.
Yes.
And yeah, that's the one. 4K, basically a locked or close to it, 240 frames per second. Latency indicator on screen was kind of like 40-ish milliseconds, which is good, I would say. And here's the thing, right? I mean, frame generation. There's a lot of pushback against it, but similar to upscaling, sorry guys, it's coming. It's going to become a key part of GPU, the outputs of GPUs going forward in the next generation for reasons which we've talked about in the past, principally that the cost of making GPUs is going up, the cost of silicon is going up, and we're going to be increasingly more reliant on machine learning based features to give you the quote unquote, and I don't like to use the word performance boosts, I will say frame rate boosts. I still think that's probably the way forward there. But you're starting to see a coherent vision come together, because you had like multi-frame generation, 240 frames per second in one corner, and then literally right next to it, G-Sync Pulsar, where you've got like, I've got to say, John, it's the first time I saw it, and you're right, it is a game changer in display technology. Right. And you're right, the concept of what a high frame rate looks like and how it presents is very, very different when you've got a decent display that isn't smearing detail. And I think we're going to have to start looking at what a GPU does more holistically compared to, and how it interacts with new display technologies. And then there's the whole concept of latency. Now, in the sponsor video I did with Asus, we had this situation where it was like, okay, well, let's take a look at what NVIDIA Reflex is actually doing. And you're seeing that without Reflex, games are actually, quote unquote, laggy, based on the idea that people seem to think that frame generation adds unacceptable lag to games. Actually, what's happening is that frame generation with Reflex is sitting at a midway point between games without Reflex and games running with Reflex. And I just want to bring up this visualization here of, I extended the test that I did for Cyberpunk 2077 within that video, and I included a Radeon card, the 9070 and the 9070 and 9070 XT. And we have this really weird situation here where on an average, the NVIDIA card, the 5070, is actually the weakest in terms of frame rate. It's about 38 frames per second average. And then you've got the 9070 and 9070 XT, even with ray tracing, actually running faster than the NVIDIA card. However, the latency is higher than the NVIDIA card running at a lower frame rate. So this whole concept, I think, of how GPUs is going to evolve and where we're heading, there's sort of like established relationships that we have in our mind, which is that the faster a game runs, the lower the latency, which is true to a certain extent. But I think when you look at results like this, it's kind of like there's more to it. There's actually a more holistic viewpoint of base latencies, what frame generation is doing, and there are differences between the vendors there, which are quite interesting. The concept that the 9070 XT has got a significant frame rate advantage. It's like 12 frames per second faster on average than the 5070, but actually has higher input lag. It's kind of mind-blowing. I should say that I also tested the AMD cards with anti-lag on the driver level. Makes no difference, which says to me that AMD actually has that anti-lag kind of enabled at the driver level already. But Oliver, you saw all of these demos the same as I did. What do you make of all of this? Because it's an interesting time for graphics.
It is an interesting time for graphics, and we're getting into an era where the experience on NVIDIA and now increasingly Intel is getting harder and harder to compare to the AMD experience, because you've got multi-frame generation, you've got all these great anti-lag technologies, you've got ray reconstruction. You've got, obviously, a class-leading upscaling solution as well with the ray reconstruction light model, aka DLSS 4.5. So, you do have AMD analogs in some of those areas, but in other areas, you don't have AMD analogs. And indeed, when you look at the experience on a high-end PC of playing a game like Outer Worlds 2, even though its performance level is not my favorite, and even though I'm sure in the NVIDIA demo, Rich, I'm sure your demo was the same, it was in the enclosed ship area. And not in the open world. That's like a bit tricky, and it is funny because it's like, yes, obviously you're getting this really high performance level with dynamic MFG at 240 frames per second, or I'm sure you could push it well above that even on a monitor that was capable of it. but just the idea that you're getting that experience in a segment that's not very relevant to the gameplay experience. And if you actually get out the open world,
right. Yeah.
Never mind even, shader compilation stutter. Obviously the game has significant issues with traversal on PC. But beyond the kind of like, let's say PC hygiene issues of those titles and their various issues with traversal stutter and similar issues, that experience on PC with the super high frame rates, now with NVIDIA Pulsar, with ray reconstruction, with all this stuff, is just like pushing a level beyond what other vendors can supply. And it's really just a matter at this point of us kind of waiting and seeing whether AMD can kind of come close to some of these technologies. I think we're seeing with Intel that Intel is actually closer in some respects, or at least chasing these things a little bit closer to NVIDIA than AMD is. So I'm hoping that we see a little more homogenization from the graphics vendors, especially as we begin to approach the next generation of console hardware, in whether that's in 2020, 2027 or 2028. I want to see a more fulsome NVIDIA matching feature set than what's currently contemplated by AMD's offerings with Project Redstone. It's just not sufficient at the moment.
Right. Yeah, I think there is going to be a convergence of features simply because it's the direction of travel. It's really interesting from my perspective that back in the day, the reason that you could produce perfectly fine like-for-like benchmark reviews of an AMD and an NVIDIA GPU was basically Microsoft was setting the standards with DirectX. Mm-hmm. Microsoft's not really done anything with DirectX since DirectX 12 Ultimate. And in the meantime, there's been a vacuum when NVIDIA has taken point with all of these machine learning-based technologies, which has created this disparity. And it's now to the point where Microsoft, in terms of DirectX, is almost irrelevant to the conversation, which has created this sort of situation. But, John, I've got to talk about Pulsar because you made a remarkable statement when we talked about Pulsar, which I didn't believe at the time until I saw it with my own eyes. Well, I wouldn't say I wouldn't believe it because I trust what you say, but it was basically the concept that the perception of frame rate, the concept of having like 4x motion clarity does actually have an impact on how you perceive frame rate. And so the demo that we saw, I think it was the Anno game, and it was running at like 120 frames per second on Pulsar. But the motion clarity of it was just astonishingly good.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, the reason this made sense to me is like you go back and, play a game on a CRT, which I do all the time, right? And we always thought 60 FPS looks great, and it still does, right? But you put that 60 FPS on a flat panel, a high persistence display with sample and hold, it doesn't look so good, does it? It's very blurry. It really is. And it just never looked quite right as a result. And so naturally, when you get a low persistence display like a Pulsar monitor, essentially it solves that problem completely. And those lower frame rates suddenly look great. And that's really, really interesting stuff. And obviously the benefit of Pulsar is that you're able to do it with VRR. So you don't have to set a maximum limit to your frame rate, right? You can just enjoy it at whatever your GPU can pump out, but you get that perfect motion clarity all the time. And by the way, I do have a note from NVIDIA that they are still implementing the lower refresh rate option in firmware. It turned out to be more challenging than expected, apparently, but they are very much still hard at work on that, and hopefully we should have that fairly soon. So,
yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Just the more utility that screen has, the better, basically. I just want to quickly go back to that latency test because, I'm not going to be, I think we need to be quite clear about what I'm saying here about latency and frame rate. Obviously, if you look holistically at the result here, the 9070 XT has the highest frame rate and it has latency that's only slightly lower than the NVIDIA card. So, on balance with these particular settings, the 9070 XT is quote unquote the best. But what I'm trying to say is that the concept of what goes into a good experience provided by your graphics card is actually a bit more nuanced than just frame rate or just latency. It's going to be like a more holistic view of, I think, going forward, things, latency is important. The base frame rate, base latency is important. The frame generated latency, also important. And probably most crucially of all, the quality of those generated frames. So, it's pretty good at the moment. I think you'd agree, Oliver. But, when you are talking about 240 frames per second, what it does mean is that each frame is like persisting for like 4 milliseconds, I think. So it's, there's quite a lot of leeway in the quality of the generated frames there. I think, hopefully that's going to get better. You'd expect these technologies all to evolve as we move into the next generation. Looking forward to seeing what dynamic frame generation is going to look like, and certainly on more challenging fare. But again, going back to that latency test, I mean, I had to get sort of meaningful metrics here. I had to basically lock to native 1440p resolution, which you probably wouldn't be doing in the real world. On the NVIDIA side, you can get similar performance by using path tracing with DLSS, which you probably wouldn't be doing on the AMD side. It's really difficult to produce like-for-like metrics at this point based on how people are actually going to be using the cards. It's sort of moving into uncharted territory, and this is sort of, as I said, the direction of travel. But certainly a really interesting showcase of demos there, and dynamic frame generation. Yeah, I mean, 240 frames per second, 6F MFG, base frame rate would be like 40 frames per second, I guess. How good is that actually going to be? I guess we just have to find out. Okay, let's move on. So DF Direct Weekly, we've changed. We're evolving it. Supporter Q&A is actually going to be a separate show now. So how are we going to end the show? Well, I think we should be talking about our content, kind of like what we used to do in the past. And yesterday, at the time of filming, we we put out our review for High on Life 2. And I can actually exclusively reveal the like versus dislike ratio. It's like 91.2%. A lot of people have a lot of dislikes. Typically, it's about 96 to 97%. And a lot of people very angry in the comments, Oliver. Yeah. I'm just reading some of the comments here. It's not that many I can actually read out. I'll read out this one. I'm pretty sure Alex strictly refused to review this Unreal Engine 5 slop. You guys must be so tired to see so many games falling into the pit of mediocrity that this engine has created. As a silver lining, it makes your job still super interesting. It would be boring just to review beautiful, smooth 4K 60 games. First game, another comment, the first game looked 100% far better than this UE5 slop. Considering the game fluctuates between 40 to 60 FPS constantly, and you are mostly fine with it, I hope you give this game the same leeway for Pragmata on Switch 2, which has the same performance in the demo, and you don't call it terribly unstable or anything like that when you release the review for that game. Just a thought, since you're often quite harsh regarding Switch 2 performance in many games. Are we?
Are we? What?
These shadows, 720p, no HDR, vomit emoji, hands on face emoji. You shouldn't buy this broken crap. It's a good game, right? What's going on?
Well, I had a lot of thoughts on this issue. I guess in terms of the Pragmata comparison, Pragmata on Switch 2 is the worst performer. I'll just say that, at least at the moment. But yeah, there were a lot of people in the comments section who thought that we were too light in the game, calling it diabolical that the game on PS5 would run at 720p. And a lot of people critiquing the coverage. And I think there are a couple of responses to that. The first issue is that with High on Life, there isn't any alternative. So There's no 30 FPS mode, there's no 40 FPS mode, there's just the performance mode, which is 720p typically internally. 720p is not that unusual for current generation console games. Having bad image quality in 60 FPS modes, not that unusual, I gotta say, for current generation console games.
Yeah.
It's just something we're kind of dealing with. In this case, it's particularly bad, I think, in particular because we're dealing with like large, directly lit scene environments that don't fare so well with TSR. It does not do a very good job. But there's also a sense, maybe a separate sense, that the PS5 Pro version just isn't doing anything that's all that interesting because it is a similar resolution to the base game on PS5. And it's got a bit better performance, but the PSSR toggle doesn't really improve the game's visual presentation, how many times have we said that over the years? It's not very good, and it's just overall, I understand those criticisms. But yeah, I kind of feel at this point, like, talking about current generation software, I don't really feel the need to hammer home the point of the game having bad image quality too badly. And I actually think in the review, what we basically said and what we showed was a game with relatively poor image quality, right? But beyond that, I mean, I think another serious issue with the title is the performance isn't great, and it tends to have a lot of like stuttery behavior. This is obviously a very typical UE5 pain point, and I think we hit that topic pretty well. It's kind of a similar problem from my perspective, similarly problematic from my perspective, especially on base PlayStation 5, which seems to suffer some significant issues. And then on top of that, I kind of felt like my own particular ire was reserved for the Series S piece of this whole conversation. Because like, as much as you critique the PS5 version, as much as you critique the Series X version, those are still good-looking versions of a good-looking UE5 game. I'm not going to say that image quality is great. It's obviously not great, and I said the exact same thing in the review. I'm not going to say that performance is great, but they're good-looking games. Series S is just cut back gigantic, like to a ridiculous degree almost. It looks like a totally different game. So I don't personally feel like we were being too favorable towards the game, especially if you watched the video and looked at the footage. But I totally understand, and I totally sympathize with people who at this point are looking at the state of Unreal Engine 5 on consoles and are having a really negative reaction to some of these games that are coming out with 900p internal resolutions, 720p internal resolutions, poor image quality, poor performance. I totally understand it. And like I said in the piece, I think this is only going to get better when we start talking about much more powerful console hardware, because it just seems like Unreal Engine 5, maybe it's a bit too heavy for this generation of consoles at 60 FPS. I think that's increasingly what we're seeing, is that it's a little bit of a problematic effort, especially if you want to maintain image quality like we saw, towards the end of last generation on a Series X. We haven't seen that in quite some time, I feel like, in general on the console platforms. So I totally sympathize with that perspective. It's just a matter of emphasis. Where do I put my negativity? I chose to put it towards...
You enjoyed playing the game, though, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, the other part of it, I guess, which goes without saying, is that it's quite a good game. It has some innovative gameplay ideas, very fun, very fast, very flexible, has interesting combat. Like, it's a good game, just with some technical problems, but they're not technical problems that are unique to this game necessarily, right? You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So I kind of feel like that's my response to it.
Right. Okay, John, do you think it does? Should we have hammered High on Life 2 more?
I don't believe so. And somebody left a comment saying 720p upscaled. WTF happened to game development? And I would say y'all need to look back at where we've come from, because this generation does have its issues, as most do, but the number of games hitting and getting close to actually delivering a pretty stable 60 FPS is so much higher than the last generation, and certainly miles beyond the generation before that. Now, first of all, you can always repeat the refrain about Unreal Engine, like, oh, maybe Unreal overshot this generation. That was true with Unreal Engine 3. It was true again with Unreal Engine 4. It's true again with Unreal Engine 5. It happens every single time with Unreal Engine. So this is nothing new. But despite those issues, I still think we're seeing better overall experiences than before. Like, you look last gen, outside of some very rare exceptions, UE4 games were not running around at a smooth 60 FPS on PS4 and Xbox One, right?
Right.
And you look at the generation prior to that, 720p was not common anyway. I mean, there was a lot of low res. We didn't have image treatment of today. 720p from that generation is not the same as 720p with temporal upsampling, not even close. But more importantly, games on PS360 were lucky to hit 30 FPS, and that was rare. Only the best optimized big games were hitting 30. You were usually looking at like 20 to 25 FPS with screen tearing. I mean, you know what it was like, Rich. Those were not good days. Like, I could not believe, you look at something like Mass Effect 3 when that came out. The PS3 version, the very first scene, it's like 15 frames per second. It is so bad. You're like, how can a big game come out and look and run like this? It was terrible. And that was the norm. Medal of Honor 2010, like, it's a joke. You load it up on a PS3 and even 360, it's just full screen tearing everywhere, super below 30 FPS. It's a nightmare. Like, we have actually come a long way from that, right? The fact that we're getting mostly 60 FPS with some minor dips here, like this is actually a huge boost. I agree though, 720p upsampled, it's not optimal. The image quality I do think is not as good as I would like to see for sure. And I admit I'm also spoiled because I'm playing it on PC, so I'm kind of dodging that bullet in general. But I don't know. I do think this generation, when you look at the amount of games that are actually hitting 60 FPS targets and mostly getting there, it's a big improvement over the last two generations.
Right. I see what you're saying there, John, because, fundamentally, there's no such thing as a free lunch in rendering. And if we go back to, the original Unreal Engine 5 demos, all the way up to like the Matrix Awakens, they were, there was the sense that the Unreal Engine 5 feature set was designed for 30 frames per second on consoles.
Correct.
And the users have spoken. They've said they want 60 frames per second experiences. So it's kind of like, how do you make that trade? I suppose you have like 30, 40, and 60 modes. That would be the ideal way forward, but it involves a lot of work to do that, to rebalance the game effectively 3 times. Yeah.
I would also say, like, the visual quality on display in this game, PCs where I'm basing from, but the console versions have shared the same look. It is a huge leap from the first one. The size and scope of the environments is massive. That when you go to that whole sequence where you go into like political con and murder con and all that, like jumping out from your craft into this like sea of vehicles flying around and like these huge towering structures. Some of that stuff actually reminded me of Cyberpunk in terms of the way it was designed. I thought it was really, really beautiful. The lighting and the materials are striking. Like, it's a beautiful game. But most importantly, I think this game is genuinely like beyond my expectations as far as like being outstanding. This is a really creative, interesting shooter that does things that I just absolutely love. Like, the way I look at it, this is like combining elements of Halo with something like Sunset Overdrive. And maybe a little bit of Doom, but it's like the main key here is like, because of that skateboard mechanic, you can now have these large arenas where you can cross them quickly. And this is actually different from Halo, but like, you have these huge spaces, right? If you're just on foot running around, crossing those spaces is slow, which means you're moving from like one part of the space to another part of the space, slowly making your way, eliminating enemies. Because of the skateboard, however, you cross all of them very quickly, and you could do it in creative ways with grinding and jumping and all these rails everywhere. And it also means that you can aim around your character while you're grinding or moving forward, right? So you can be grinding away from an enemy, but then turn around and shoot at them. And so it creates this loop where you're constantly on the move, doing, hitting these ramps, half pipes, rails, everything, flying through the air, you're swinging. It just keeps this momentum really, really high. And yet, so it's like Halo combat, but like high speed movement. And I think I can't think of many shooters that quite play like this. And I actually found the original game got quite tedious. I did feel like it was often just a slog, just moving through enemies. You're moving slowly through it. It was a little bit of a slog. This one does not have that. And just like beyond that, the level of creativity on display, like the different missions and the places you visit, like there's just some really wildly creative stuff. They're constantly flipping mechanics on its head, doing things that like that scene with the freaking menu, like this, I love this kind of stuff where it's like the enemy shrinks down and gets inside your suit and he's like, oh no, it's infested your menu. You literally hit the escape key on your keyboard playing on PC, and he's like there in the actual menu that you use, and he's messing it up. He's like kicking letters off, he's like breaking the menu, and then the whole mechanic is like you're in the normal game menu and trying to defeat the enemy that's like inside your menu. And like the way they mess around with it is just, it's crazy. There's the NES games that show up, the Genesis games that show up, and the way all that stuff is integrated. Like using that specific NES game as like a torture device is freaking hilarious. There's just they run in all these directions, and it's really just full of these creative moments in a way that the original I don't think ever truly was. I freaking love this game. I think it's great. And so even with these technical faults, I think it's so interesting and fun to play that it's worth overlooking them. I've overlooked them. There's stutters on the PC. There's checkpoint stutters on there. There's some traversal stutter. I don't like that, but it's not going to keep me from playing it because I'm really having a good time with it. And it otherwise does run well on, a high-end PC, to be fair. I would like to see how it runs on a low-spec machine. And the PC version does have the option to turn off Lumen like Series S on a really low-spec system. So, I don't know.
Final thoughts, Oliver?
I agree with respect to the gameplay. I think it's doing some interesting things. I really was not expecting a game that combined so many elements of shooting games and action games that I've enjoyed over the years and combined them into one interesting whole. The skateboarding mechanic is legitimately innovative, I think, and it works in a way that's not distracting. It does not involve much thinking, kind of just engage the skateboard, and all of a sudden you're doing railguns automatically, you're sliding into enemies, you're doing all kinds of cool things that feel directed enough by the player actions without actually involving an active kind of planning process that might distract from the kind of moment-to-moment Doom Halo style gameplay in the mix there with lots of close-up combat. That's really quite something, and I agree it's an entertaining shooter game for sure. But I also just do feel like in terms of expectations, I think expectations have gone up visually in every direction all at once.
Sure,
it's hard to match his expectations because I totally agree. Like, go back to 360 PS3. I mean, the games had miserable aliasing, and they were running at these resolutions without temporal upsampling. They looked awful relative to this in terms of that presentation of aliasing that you'd often see. Maybe there are a few rare exceptions where, like, Blur was doing like 4 times MSA or something. There were a few games in the mix that were all right, but by and large, it was not nearly as good as this. But I think people's expectations have evolved. And like, you look at the popular reception to games like Battlefield 6 and Marathon, which maybe have a lower level of rendering fidelity, but have great image quality and performance. And I think you see, in some cases, a bit of a mixed response to those games as well, because they're not pushing out these advanced rendering features in the way that a game like High on Life 2 might.
Oh, for sure.
I think it's just a matter of, like, people have really high expectations. I understand those expectations. One new expectation, like you mentioned, this generation is 60 FPS. 60 FPS high-end rendering features, great image quality. Pick one or pick two, maybe.
Yeah, you're
not going to get all three. You're not getting all three, not on consoles. Sometimes on PC, not always on PC. So it's a tricky situation for sure, I think.
Okay, good stuff. Well, that was the last topic, therefore the end of the show. The Q&A is coming soon, but for now, that's all we've got. So like, subscribe, share if you enjoyed it, ring bells for notifications for you, and potentially entirely imaginary algorithmic boosts for us. But really, it's all about the DF supporter program, patreon.com/Digital Foundry. Join us. But that's all from us on this one. Thanks for watching and supporting Digital Foundry, and we'll see you soon.